In this video, I'm going to explain to you the comprehensible input timeline. That is how you get from an absolute beginner of English and get all the way up to a C1 advanced English student, all just using comprehensible input. I will go through each stage of the journey. A0 absolute beginner, A1 beginner, A2 upper beginner, B1 intermediate, and finally B2 upper intermediate. And I'll explain what you can expect to learn at each level, and I will explain to you what you should do at each level to progress to the next stage. So let's begin. At this level, there is only one thing that you actually need to do. Watch comprehensible input made for absolute beginners of English. You don't need to open a textbook, you don't need to study grammar, you don't need to learn grammar rules about English. All you need to do is just watch comprehensible input that has been made especially for absolute beginners of English. On this English Sponge channel, you can find a short course for absolute beginners to learn the absolute basics of English from zero. At this level, you will learn very, very basic words like I, you, like, can, can't, will, won't, have, am, it, go, and other very simple words like that. To get from an absolute beginner of English up to the A1 beginner level of English should only take around 4 or 5 hours. It does not need to take a long time to learn these absolute basic things and get to the point where you know at least a tiny bit of English. To be honest, most people in the world already have an A1 beginner level of English just from what they learned when they were at school or what they heard on TV or what they have heard around them. Because English is such a well-known language, most people have heard at least a few basic words of English. However, there are people who still know zero English, and that's what this level is for. Okay, so now we're at the A1 beginner level. At this stage, most English courses will tell you that you now need to go and memorize things like colors, numbers, names of animals, and names of foods and things like that. This is absolutely wrong, okay? There is no need to focus on trying to memorize each of the colors individually at this stage. There is no need to go and try and learn the names of the animals, like a bird, dog, cat, pig. This is not a good way to approach this stage. There is only one thing that you need to do at the A1 beginner stage of English, and that is to watch lots of comprehensible input made for A1 beginners of English. Nothing else is necessary. Things like numbers and colors and the names of animals and the names of foods will be learned naturally through watching comprehensible input at the A1 level. There is no need to try and remember the colors or try and remember the numbers. And to be honest, this early stage of English is where a lot of people quit. A lot of people, they get really bored in the very beginning of learning English, trying to remember the names of colors and animals, and it all seems kind of childish and very boring as well. It's much more interesting and enjoyable to learn by watching comprehensible input videos. At the A1 beginner level, you will learn basic words like see, watch, eat, drink, take, bring, and those kinds of verbs. You will learn some basic nouns like table, pen, tree, cup, and things like that. You will learn some basic adjectives like happy, sad, hot, and cold. You will also see lots of function words, words like him, her, this, that, there, from, with, to, about. At this stage, these function words will be very confusing for learners, but that's okay. You don't need to study the function words specifically. As you keep watching comprehensible input at the A1 level, these kind of function words will slowly start to make sense in your mind. Personally, I think at this level, there is no need to read, there's no need to speak, and there's no need to write. At this stage, you're trying to learn your first 100, 200 words or so, and there's no need to learn these words through reading when you can learn them all through listening and get the correct pronunciation early on. Some people may find it helpful to open a textbook and learn a bit of basic grammar to help them understand the language a bit more. You can do this if you want, although it is not actually completely necessary. Some people want to start talking English right from the very beginning, but why? Why start talking when you are so limited in what you can say? Why start talking and saying things like, I like pizza, or I don't like football? Instead, why not just wait until you have learned more vocabulary, and so that when you do start speaking, you can actually talk properly instead of just these very basic sentences. Just a quick note, some people suggest that you watch children's cartoons at the A1 beginner level. Absolutely not. Children's cartoons are far too difficult for an A1 beginner to understand. Some people will even tell you to go and watch movies in English right from the A1 beginner level. This is not a good idea. You will not be able to understand anything that is happening in the movie. To get from the A1 beginner level of English to the upper beginner A2 level will take roughly around 50, 60 or 70 hours or so. Okay, now we're at the A2 upper beginner level of English. Actually, this is my least favorite stage of learning a language, personally. Now, you may have guessed it, but there is only one thing you need to do at the A2 upper beginner level, and that is to watch lots and lots of comprehensible input made for people, made for students at the A2 level. At this level, you will start listening to people talk about common topics like the weather, sports, family, friends, daily routines, restaurants, and things like that. Again, not by memorizing vocabulary about these topics, but just through watching comprehensible input at the A2 level. At this level, you can really begin to start to understand people when they make full sentences. You can start to follow people actually talking slowly at this level about basic things. At this level, you will start to understand the difference between the present simple, for example, I eat, and the present continuous, I am eating. Of course, even this can still be a bit confusing because actually the difference between I eat and I am eating is not always as simple as it may seem in the beginning. But you will get the general idea of the difference between these two tenses. You will start to understand the future simple tense. You will understand when to say I will or I'm going to do something. Again, not through doing grammar exercises in a textbook, but more just through listening to people speak in comprehensible input and noticing that whenever they talk about tomorrow or next week, they always seem to say, I'm going to do something or I will do something. You will watch comprehensible input and notice how people talk about the future. You will also start to recognize the past simple tense. it will quickly become clear that when people talk about the past, they often use verbs that end in ed, like walked, worked, learned, and so on. You will also begin to recognize some irregular past tense verbs like went, ran, saw, and so on. But these irregular past tense verbs will still be kind of confusing when you see a new one that you haven't seen before. Most traditional English courses will not teach the present perfect tense very much at this stage. However, I think it's a good idea to start learning the present perfect, at least the basic uses of the present perfect at this stage. And that's why in my videos, in my A2 level videos, I always try, when I can, I always try to include present perfect in a very basic way to help you guys get an understanding of the present perfect early on when you're learning English. To get from the A2 upper beginner level of English to the B1 intermediate level will take around 200 hours of watching comprehensible input in English. It could be a bit less, it could be more. These are just rough estimates. I don't know the exact number that it will take you personally. At this stage, if you want, you can do a bit of speaking, a bit of reading, a bit of writing if you want, but not too much. And it's also not necessary to do these things. The main thing that you need to do is watch around 150 more hours of comprehensible input at the A2 level. You can do other things if you want to have a bit of fun, but the most important thing that you do will be the comprehensible input. Again, some learners will find it helpful to study a little bit of grammar to help them understand what is happening, but not too much. Remember, the main thing to focus on is the comprehensible input. One of the traps that you can fall into if you start speaking now at the A2 upper beginner level is that you create a habit whereby you only use the present simple for everything and you don't really use the past tense when you need to. I have seen many students over the years who don't use the past tense. They just say, yesterday I go to the shops, probably because they started speaking English very early and they got used to this habit early on. By the way, at this level, it's still too early, really, to start watching children's cartoons in English. It is surprising that children's cartoons are not really beginner level input. And of course, it's definitely too early to be trying to watch movies in English at this stage. Okay, so now that we're at the B1 intermediate stage, things start to get a bit more fun. I quite like the B1 intermediate level. Now you're going to be at this stage for quite a long time, so get comfortable. Now, of course, the main thing that you need to focus on at this level is just watching massive amounts of comprehensible input at the B1 level. Your main goal here is just to keep growing your vocabulary, just to learn more and more and more words. By now, you should be quite familiar with the past simple tense, although if you do start speaking, you will probably still make some mistakes with the past tense. Here at this stage, you will start to hear some more advanced structures like some of the conditionals, the second conditional or the third conditional, for example. These will be quite confusing for you at this stage, but if you keep listening to comprehensible input at the B1 level and you keep hearing the second conditional and the third conditional and maybe things like the present perfect, you will gradually, slowly, you will begin to understand how these more advanced tenses are used. Surprisingly, at this stage, function words like for, since, during, to, from, about, these words will still, even at the B1 intermediate stage, these words will still be kind of confusing for you. But as you keep listening to more and more comprehensible input, these kind of function words will slowly start to make sense for you. If you find that you are still making mistakes with the so-called basic words of English, basic things like prepositions and articles like the, a, and an, don't worry, okay? Because students will continue to make mistakes with these basic function words all the way up until the advanced level. So if you're confused about which preposition to use from, about, for, or if you're confused with which article to use, like the, a, an, or maybe not to use an article, this is completely normal. Okay, students will continue to struggle with these little words all the way up until the advanced level. So don't worry about that. That's because these so-called basic words are actually not basic at all. They're actually incredibly difficult to use correctly all the time. The more that you listen to comprehensible input, the more you will get a natural feel for when these words should be used and when they should not be used and where they should be used. Again, at this stage, some students will find it helpful to do a little bit of grammar study to just help them understand like how the language works. It's not absolutely necessary to study grammar, but to be honest, I think it does help quite a lot of people just to study a little bit of grammar. Now that we've reached the B1 intermediate stage, now could be a good time to finally start speaking, reading, and writing. I don't recommend speaking, reading, or writing before this B1 intermediate stage. Now would be a good time to start speaking because at this stage, you actually now have quite a lot of vocabulary. You have a lot of words in your mind that you can use so that now when you start speaking, you will actually be able to talk properly. You will actually be able to speak about different topics instead of if you try to speak at the very beginning and you can only say things like, I like pizza or I am cold. You know, you're very limited in terms of what you can say when you're a beginner. But if you start speaking now at the intermediate level, you will actually be able to make interesting points and actually talk about things in a bit more of a complicated way. And you have the benefits of not creating really bad habits by talking early on before you have actually listened enough. As for reading, you can start reading a bit at this stage. I still don't recommend doing loads and loads of reading just yet. I recommend that you save your reading for a bit more for when you're a B2 upper intermediate level. I don't recommend doing lots of reading yet at this stage because of the effect it can have on your pronunciation when you learn new vocabulary through reading. I've made a video on this topic and I will put a link to it just here. If you do delay your speaking until now, if you do finally start speaking now at the intermediate B1 level, it will still be difficult at first to start speaking because your lips and your tongue and your mouth is not used to speaking in English. So it will take some speaking practice to actually get used to actually talking in English. But you may be surprised at how fast you progress with your speaking because you already have lots of the vocabulary you need up here. So all you need to do now, because you've done the hard part, which is learning all the words through comprehensible input, now all you need to do is just get used to speaking them, right? This will take less time than you might expect. For example, if you spend 200 hours listening to comprehensible input to reach the B1 intermediate level, you may find that it only takes 20 hours of speaking to start speaking actually quite well. You see, the time needed to acquire the vocabulary is much bigger than the time it takes to get used to using the vocabulary. The hard part is acquiring the vocabulary. To me, learning how to speak is the easier part. It's the part that takes less time in comparison, because all of the vocabulary has already been learned. All you need to do is just get used to moving your tongue, lips, and your mouth, and just get used to taking the words from your mind and speaking them. This does not take as much time as you might think. And you may find that when you do start to speak, that you make quite fast progress. Of course, for those of you who want to follow the pure method, which I have spoken about in another video, you will not want to speak, read or write yet. You will want to save that for the next level, B2, Upper Intermediate. At this stage, it can be a good time, if you want, to start actually having lessons with a teacher, if you can afford to do that. Now, non-native teachers can be very helpful, but I would honestly recommend going with a native teacher personally. And the reason for that is so that the input that you're getting from the teacher, when the teacher speaks, you're getting perfect pronunciation when they speak, which is really good input that then you will get used to and copy. Non-native teachers are great because they have had to go through the process of learning English themselves, and they can relate to you a bit more. But for this approach, for the comprehensible input approach, I recommend a native teacher so that you have a perfect model. Because when you're taking an English class, one of the best things that you get from the teacher is just input from them. You have to listen to the teacher, and that's more comprehensible input when they're talking. And even better, it's meaningful input from the teacher because they are talking to you and you need to respond. So it's really meaningful input as well, which is exactly what you want with comprehensible input. You want it to be something you care about. That's the best way to learn. Now, to me, there's no point in taking English classes when you're an A1 beginner or a A2 beginner. The reason is because at these stages, you really can't say very much. It's very difficult to speak because you haven't really learned much vocabulary yet. So your English classes at this level will be very simple, and mostly they will be about learning grammar. And of course, with most English classes at the A1 and A2 beginner level, they will tell you to read, write, and speak from the beginner level, which if you want to use the comprehensible input approach, it does not really fit, right? You should not be speaking English as an A1 beginner. But if you take traditional English classes, they will make you speak right from the beginning, and you will do lots of reading as well. Really, it's only at the B1 intermediate stage that you can really begin to speak and begin to have an actual conversation, a proper conversation with somebody, which is why now can be a good time to start taking English classes if you can afford to do that. So you could go to a website like italki or verbling.com and get a teacher to help you. You could have actual classes with the teacher, or you could pay just to have a conversation with them for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week would be a good amount. The thing to remember about taking English classes is that they are just there to help you, okay? They are not the main part of learning English, okay? Too many people think that going to an English class 2 or 3 times a week is enough to learn English by itself. It's not. The English class that you do is only something extra to help you. The foundation of your English learning should be watching comprehensible input every single day. This is really where you're going to learn most of your vocabulary. The teacher is there just to help you a couple of times a week. That's all. The teacher cannot learn the language for you. They cannot make you learn the language. You are the one in control of your learning. You need to do most of the work in your own time, and then just go to the teacher a couple of times a week just for a bit of extra help. That's what they're there for. And I'm speaking as somebody who has taught English online for around 6 years. And I've had too many students over the years who the only English that they do is they just come to my lessons 2 or 3 times a week, but they don't do anything else. And if you do this, if you think that just going to an English class a couple of times a week will be enough to see good progress with your English, I'm sorry, you are incorrect about that. The students who really make good progress with English are those who do most of the work by themselves and then just go to the teacher a couple of times a week or once a week just for something different and just for a bit of extra help. The teacher cannot make you learn the language. You need to do that for yourself, if that makes sense. By the way, the B1 intermediate level is really the time when you can really start to handle basic situations in the real world. I'm talking going to the supermarket or asking for directions on the street. A lot of people will tell you that you can go to the supermarket and go to the cafe and ask for directions on the street when you are a beginner, when you're an A2 beginner. But from my experience, people cannot do this. They cannot handle these situations until they reach about a B1 intermediate level. By the way, now is finally when watching children's TV programs may be a good idea. Okay, B1 intermediate is the time where kids' TV programs begin to be kind of understandable. Again, kids' TV programs are not for beginner language learners. This is a very common misconception that people have. Okay, so now we are at the B1.5 intermediate level, and by now you should have already watched at least 100 hours of comprehensible input at the B1 intermediate level. And now you should be starting to feel a little bit comfortable with the language. You should feel not 100% comfortable with English, but this is where you start to feel like, I feel like I know English a bit now. So at this level, I still don't recommend that you watch movies or TV shows just yet. I think it's still a little bit early to be watching these things. Instead, one thing that I recommend could be watching cartoons or Japanese anime. Japanese anime like Pokemon or Naruto or Detective Conan and this kind of thing is a really good source of comprehensible input at the B1.5 intermediate level. And there are a number of reasons for this. The first reason is that these shows were originally in Japanese and they have been translated into English and they have been dubbed. They've been dubbed in English. This just generally makes them a bit easier to understand than something that was made originally in English because they have been translated in a more simple way. Of course, these TV shows are also made for children and teenagers. That is kind of the age group. So the vocabulary will not be really high level, but they are full of really good intermediate level vocabulary. The second reason I really like Japanese anime for comprehensible input at this level is that the episodes are usually around 20 minutes long each. Now, 20 minutes is a really good length of time to watch something. When you watch a movie and it's 2 hours, it is very difficult to actually complete the movie, right? But with a 20-minute episode, you can watch 20 minutes and then take a break, and then watch another 20 minutes episode and take a break. And it's just a good length of time for comprehensible input. At this level, podcasts, which are made for intermediate level students, are also another good thing that you can do. You can put your headphones in when you're on the train and on the bus, and you can start listening to podcasts. I recommend podcasts that have a transcript that you can read or that you can listen to and read at the same time. And of course, you should also continue to watch comprehensible input videos, intermediate comprehensible input videos made by teachers like me. By the way, now that you're a B1.5 intermediate student, this could be a good time to try and start doing some language exchanges. Okay, so you could get an app like Tandem or Hello Talk and try to find a reliable language exchange partner. You could also go on a website like meetup.com and search for any language exchange events in your city. If you live in a major city, there will probably be a language exchange event at least once a month or maybe once a week. Going to a language exchange event before this level will probably be not much fun and you will just feel quite lost. But now that you're a B1.5 intermediate student, these events will actually begin to be quite fun and actually quite useful for learning as well. Okay, so now we have reached the B2 upper intermediate level of English. Personally, this is probably my favorite stage of learning a language. I really love the B2 level. Now that you're a B2 level English student, learning English can begin to get pretty fun, actually. Now, the B2 upper intermediate level, this is where you make the transition from watching comprehensible input, which is made for learners, which has been made by teachers like me for you, to moving on to actually just native content. That is content which has just been made for native speakers and not for learners. This is the level where you will slowly cross the bridge into moving away from needing videos like mine, needing English Sponge. You will gradually not need videos like mine anymore, and you can then just move on to just watching native content made for native speakers. Now, at the beginning of the B2 upper intermediate level, you should keep listening to comprehensible input. With videos like mine, I have made quite a lot of B2 level comprehensible input videos. And in these videos, I try to give you higher level vocabulary. I try to teach you a few idioms, try to teach you some phrasal verbs and just good expressions which B1 level students would not understand yet. So, but after you've watched another 100 hours of comprehensible input for the B2 level, eventually the goal is to move away from videos like mine into just watching native content. You want to get to the point where watching a native level content is understandable for you without having to translate everything too much or pause the video. Really, the goal of English Sponge is to help students like you go from being a beginner up to reaching a B2.5 upper intermediate level of understanding, at least. And then my goal is for you to reach the level where you don't need my videos anymore, right? Eventually, you will reach a point where you don't need to watch English Sponge because you can just watch native content instead. Sometimes people in the comments will ask me about C1 or C2 advanced level videos, but there's no need for me to make these videos because when you're a C1 advanced student, you don't need videos from teachers. You have all the comprehensible input that you need in the world, which is just native content. So now that you're at the B1 upper intermediate level, you have a lot of options for things that you can listen to. You can start watching TV shows. Some good recommendations would be things like The Office US, Friends, or Modern Family. If you're looking for British English, I would recommend shows like Peep Show, Black Books, Spaced, Faulty Towers or the IT Crowd. I recommend TV shows which are about regular life, sitcoms, comedies, things with people in regular situations in regular life. This is the kind of vocabulary that will be the most useful to you at this level. I don't recommend that you go and watch a movie about aliens or an action movie or something just yet. I think that TV shows about regular life are more useful at this level. Again, I recommend shows with episodes that are around 20 minutes each, so that it is easy and fun to just go through each episode 20 minutes each. At this stage, you should be able to start eventually watching YouTube videos that are just made for native speakers. Not videos like mine, which are made for learners of English, but just any YouTube videos in English. You should be able to start to understand these videos. At this level, you will begin to be able to watch travel vlogs or other vlogs of people talking about their lives, or documentaries that are on YouTube. These things will begin to become understandable for you. Podcasts are also another great option for B2 level learners. Personally, at this level, I would still recommend podcasts made for learners and not native level podcasts. By the way, TV shows like Friends, for example, is something that a lot of people suggest for B1 Intermediate students, or sometimes people suggest watching Friends for beginners. But no, that's way too early to watch Friends. Friends is not an easy thing to watch. You really need to be like a B2 upper intermediate student before you can really understand and watch Friends easily. Watching Friends as a beginner is just way too early for that. It will be very difficult to understand the storyline in an episode of Friends when you're a beginner. Oh, and by the way, when you do start watching native content at this stage, you will probably still need to use subtitles a lot of the time. You're not quite ready yet to watch native content without subtitles. You could try to watch movies at this level. I would recommend that if you do want to watch a movie at this level, that you watch movies that you already know very well. Your favorite movies that you know every line of the movie in your own language. That's a good choice for something to watch in English, because you know the story, so it's a bit easier to follow what is happening. So at the B2 upper intermediate level, you will start to get more comfortable with phrasal verbs. Things like take up, take over, look up to, rip off, fork out. And you will begin to get a bit more comfortable with some idioms like take it with a pinch of salt, or put all your eggs in one basket, or to hit the nail on the head. These kind of expressions will begin to become a bit more understandable for you. And so now that you're a B2 level student, it's definitely time to really start speaking a lot. Okay, now is the time that you've learned all this vocabulary, you've learned the correct pronunciation of all this vocabulary. You have a lot of vocabulary in your head and it's ready to be used. Okay, so this is the time when you want to speak all the time, as much as you can, to get really good at speaking English. So take classes with teachers, go to language exchange events, get language exchange partners. And now that you're a B2 upper intermediate student, you can actually really start using English in the real world in a very useful way. And the people listening to you will not have to be that patient. They will mostly be able to have a normal conversation with you, and they will not feel really annoyed by the conversation at all, because you should be understanding a lot and also starting to speak pretty well. So this is the time to really do extensive speaking, at least a few hundred hours of speaking English to get really good at it. Also, now at the B2 level is a good time to start doing extensive reading. As I've mentioned in another video, reading a lot before this level can cause a lot of problems and confusion with pronunciation. And there's also no need to learn vocabulary by reading before this level, because you can learn all the vocabulary you need through listening before this level. But now that you've already built lots of vocabulary through listening, now is a good time to really start to do lots and lots of reading as well. After all, reading is comprehensible input too. News articles or stories for teenagers like Harry Potter, or even things like YouTube comments underneath videos, or of course, reading material made by teachers for the B2 level specifically. You can also start writing here at the B2 level as well. Feel free to start writing an essay or writing a letter, or just writing more in English in general. For somebody who is following the pure method of learning, the B2 level, I think, is the time to start speaking. Now that you're B2, it's time to finally stop being quiet and go and speak for the first time. By the way, the B2 upper intermediate level is a great time to go and visit an English-speaking country. Take a trip to the UK or the USA or Canada or Australia, if you can do that. Now that you're B2, upper intermediate, you will actually be able to really communicate with native English speakers when you visit one of these countries. If you visit before this stage, you will find that it's a little bit difficult to communicate with people. But now that you're B2, you will really start to be able to get by and handle yourself in an English-speaking country without having lots of problems. So that's basically it, guys. I'm not going to talk much about the C1 or C2 advanced levels. Basically, if you're a C1 advanced level English student, great job. You've made it. You've reached a level that most people will never reach. If you're a C1 advanced student, you want to do basically just use English in any way that you can, watching all kind of movies that you want, watching TV shows, speaking to as many people as possible, writing things, reading books and reading all kinds of different things. That's what you want to do at the C1 advanced level. And at this level, you should be able to start being able to understand things without subtitles, right? This is the level when you can, right now, you can sort of maybe start to watch a movie without subtitles, although maybe not. It is still difficult. By the way, even at the C1 advanced stages of learning English, you will still make mistakes. You will still have problems with basic words like prepositions and articles. You will not know when to use from, about, to, and these little words. You will still get things wrong, okay? So don't worry. It's only when you are a C2 upper advanced student that you can really start speaking with basically no mistakes. So you should still expect to make mistakes even at this level with these basic words. Thank you for watching this video, guys. I hope it's been helpful to learn about the comprehensible input timeline. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one.